Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. For several years now, the Public Policy Center of the University of Arkansas's Research and Extension Division has been gifting voters with crystal clear analysis of ballot referenda, initiated acts, proposed amendments to the state constitution. The center's team has earned universal praise for its scrupulously fair, nonpartisan work. This being an even-numbered year, that team is back, and we're happy to have them with us the next half hour. Dr. Stacy McCullough is director of the Community and Economic Development Unit at the Extension Service, where Wayne Miller is a professor and extension economist. And thanks, obviously, to both of you for making yourselves available again and for your research. I was struck, one of your colleagues pointed out immediately before the taping that the 7 questions which may appear on the November ballot is the most submitted to the electorate since 1968, what, 48 years now. So quite an agenda we have before us.
Absolutely.
Wayne, why don't we start with you? You've got the first question, first issue that's scheduled to appear on the ballot.
Okay. Yeah, we have 7 issues to go through, and so we'll try to go through them quickly, but provide you with some of the basic essential information, what we think is important to basically understand what we're going to be voting on come November 8th. And issue number 1 is a constitutional amendment submitted by the Arkansas General Assembly to the voters of Arkansas for approval or not approval. And it's a fairly straightforward amendment, but it does contain 4 different components in this amendment. And it deals mostly with county elected officials. And the first component is it will allow 4-year terms for county officials, all county elected officials except for the quorum court or the justice of peace members. Currently, they are 2-year terms, and if approved, they will then become 4-year terms. Not in this election. Those elected in November will still have the 2-year terms, but any future elections, it will be have 4-year terms.
So it applies to the executive officers of a county.
Exactly, and not more of the legislative branch or the justice of peace. They will maintain their 2-year terms, even if this passes. The second component is that these elected county officials, as well as the quorum court members or the justice of peace, will not be allowed to hold civil office. And so that means if they're a county judge or assessor, that they cannot be on a statewide board, commission, or board, or mayor, any civil office. I think this currently applies to the state legislators, but now this would also apply to the county elected officials that could not hold civil office. The third component, if there's only one candidate in a position for state or local election, then they wouldn't have to put that name on the ballot. And so if there was only one candidate running for a special election office, kind of thing, they wouldn't have to hold the election, basically, one candidate. And the fourth component is basically defining infamous crime. And it's saying that currently the Constitution states that if you are accused of an infamous crime, you cannot hold an elected position. And it wasn't defined in the Constitution, so what this is trying to do is more define what infamous crime means. And let me see if I can find out exactly what they say. It would include a felony offense, abuse of office, as defined under Arkansas law, tampering, or a misdemeanor offense involving an act of deceit, fraud, or false statement, including misdemeanor offenses related to election process. So that's basically the 4 components.
Yeah, fairly straightforward.
Exactly.
As Dr. McCullough is issue 2 or question 2.
Right. So issue 2 was also referred by the state's General Assembly to voters, and it's a constitutional amendment that would allow voters or allow the governor to retain his or her office when he leaves the state. So currently we have an amendment in the Constitution, Amendment 6, that shifts the power to the lieutenant governor or the president of the Senate if the lieutenant governor is unable to fulfill those duties. In the cases of impeachment, removal of office, resignation, inability to do their job absence from the state, or death. So this basically would strike the language absence from the state. All those other conditions would still apply, but if the governor were to leave the state for any purpose, he or she would still be able to retain their powers.
I'm always struck by the number of people who there's been so much about it over the last several years, but once the governor steps across, say, State Line Avenue in Texarkana, he or she is no longer governor.
That's correct. And so this would change that. That would allow, if they're traveling, it doesn't really specify whether it's official purposes or unofficial purposes, but if they were to leave the state and still have the ability to do their office, they should be able to retain that power.
That's pretty straightforward. Issue 3 is a little more complicated, rather more.
Sure. So issue 3 is the final issue that was referred by the state legislature. They can refer up to 3, and this year they have done so. And issue 3 is an amendment that would change actually 3 sections of the state's constitution. It would change Article 12, Amendment 62, and Amendment 82. And all of those sections is specifically dealing with job creation, job expansion, and economic development. So one of the things that it adds or puts into the Constitution that affects kind of all of those locations is the phrase industrial development. That's typically what we have in our Constitution related to economic development activities. It kind of replaces that language with the phrase economic development, and then it goes on to define what economic development projects and economic development services and infrastructure would mean. It also gives the General Assembly the ability to modify that definition with a 3/4 vote in the future. So then if you go into the very specifics of it, the first thing that it would do is it would remove the limitation that's in our Constitution in Amendment 82 that caps the amount of the dollar value of economic development bonds that the state can issue. Currently, Amendment 82 sets that at 5% of the state's general revenue. So this would remove that 5% limitation. The General Assembly would still have to approve any bonds that are issued, but that 5% cap would be taken away. The second thing that it does is it amends Article 12, which would allow counties or municipalities, so city, towns, townships, or other forms of municipal government. It would remove the constriction that would actually allow them to obtain or provide funding for external entities, whether they're private entities, public entities, to provide economic development services for that county or municipality. This is really included in response to a lawsuit that was filed a couple years ago that challenged some cities that had been hiring or basically paying money to chambers of commerce to do some of the economic development services for that city or county. There's a restriction that prohibits counties or cities from doing that, and so this would remove that specific restriction only related to economic development. The next thing that it does, I talked about replacing the word industrial development with economic development. So that applies not only to the state, but also to counties and municipalities. So counties and municipalities would be able to issue issue bonds for economic development projects. And they would still have to hold an election to have the authorization to do that. They would still have the authority to levy special property taxes to pay for those bonds, but it gives them a more clear definition of what those types of activities are and what's allowed.
What would be permitted, yeah.
Exactly. So a couple more pieces to this one. We talked about this one has a lot of parts to it, again, all related to economic development activities. The next thing it would do would be to modify Amendment 62 to allow the state legislature to authorize the use of other taxes to pay off basically county or municipal bonds for economic development. Right now the Constitution, that section of the amendment states that they have to use special taxes. This would allow them to use other taxes. Now, it does not define what other taxes are. So the Constitution references other taxes in a couple other places, but nowhere in it does it specify what that is. And it also says that any surplus tax collections that have been collected for the purpose of paying off these bonds, they would then go into the general revenues as opposed to being able to be used to pay off additional bonds for economic development purposes. Let's see. It also removes a provision that that municipal or county bonds for economic development be sold at public sale. So right now the Constitution, Amendment 62, states that they have to be issued through a public sale. This would open that up so they could do private or public sales. So we sometimes get questions as to what does a public sale mean. So a public sale means that the entity issuing those bonds would have to publicize it in a newspaper, some type of media outlet that is accessible to the voters in that community or the people that are affected by the boundaries of that community. And that notice would have to say exactly kind of how the bonds are going to be, what the terms of the bonds are, so how they can be sold, how bids will be accepted. So this would again remove that provision and allow them to sell the bonds in whatever they feel is the best way to do so. And then the last thing it does is it would allow cities, towns, school districts, and other government entities to form compacts or agreements to take on economic development projects. So those agreements would have to be approved by the governing body of each of the partners in that. Those partners would share the responsibility of any costs, but also any benefits of those projects. So those are the main components of issue 3.
A lot to work with, and there's been obviously arguments on both sides.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want to go into that, or what are the advocates and opponents?
So one thing we haven't talked about is the Public Policy Center has developed a voter guide. In past years, we had individual fact sheets for each of the issues. This year, we've combined them all into a single voter guide. And in that voter guide, it not only contains the explanation of the issues, kind of in terms that are maybe easier to understand than the issues, the ballot titles or that you'll see when you get into the voting booth, but it also contains supporter and opponent arguments. Right. So if voters are interested to see what supporters and opponents are saying, feel free to access our voter guide. It's available online at uaex.edu/ballot, and then printed copies will be available through our county Cooperative Extension Service offices.
And good material, all of it. We'll take just a moment to note, for the benefit of the audience, that we're taping because of production schedules. We're taping our broadcast on September the 28th. Now, there is some pending litigation involving some of these issues, so it is not a lead pipe cinch that all 7 will necessarily appear, or if they do appear on the ballot, that they will be valid no matter the outcome of the election. We'll go to issue 4, Wayne, and that involves torts.
Yes, issue 4 is initiated constitutional amendment because it got enough citizen signatures to get on the November 8th ballot. And it is a constitutional amendment, and again, it has different components to this amendment. And I think there's 3 major components in this amendment. In the first, it establishes limits to contingency fees that lawyers can collect on medical injury cases. Now, I'll get into contingency fees in just a little bit. But the second major issue, it requires the state legislature, or the General Assembly, the House and Senate, to establish a maximum amount of award in a medical injury case. And so, and the medical injury award has to be at least $250,000, but it requires the state legislature to set a maximum amount. The third issue does not supersede or the right to trial by jury. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well. But going back to the first issue, where it establishes a limit on contingency fees that lawyers may collect for a medical injury lawsuit, it's 33% of
judgment.
The judgment, the amount recovered, right. Basically. But for example, if your judgment is $100,000, then the maximum that would be allowed in contingency fee for the lawyers would be $33,333. But they can deduct some direct costs associated with bringing that case to court. If there's have to pay for expert witnesses, for example, or just filing the case, these can be subtracted from that amount. So, for instance, if it's a $100,000 judgment, and there's $10,000, and say the lawyers charge 40% for their contingency fee, so that would be $40,000. But they can deduct the $10,000 as not part of that contingency fee, and so therefore they'd only be receiving $30,000, which would be below the 33 1/3% cap.
Right.
So it sets the cap. It requires legislators to set a maximum amount that can be awarded in medical injury cases. And again, it has to be at least $250,000. It can be amended by 2/3 of the vote in the House. And the Supreme Court can adjust these figures for inflation or deflation every 2 years. And so if there's an increase in inflation, the judges can increase or decrease the amount. There's still a trial by jury in this case. However, currently, the Constitution allows for the jury to determine what the award will be, with the court being able to override that if they think it's excessive. This would transfer that right to the legislature to set the award amount. And finally, too, it also defines the terms of what is defined as medical injury for healthcare providers and healthcare professionals. And I might add, too, that $250,000, at least $250,000 maximum, is per provider or healthcare professional. And so if there's an award going both against a provider and healthcare professional, there can be a maximum for each of those.
Bottom line, it would seem as an objective would be to cap malpractice or damage awards in malpractice cases.
Right, and transferring that authority from the judicial branch to the legislative branch.
Okay. Issue 5, casinos.
Oh yes, I'm sure everybody's heard a lot about casinos on newspaper or TV or whatever, but basically that again is initiated a constitutional amendment. There's enough signatures to put on the ballot so we can vote on the issue. If we accept it, it becomes a constitutional amendment, not an initiated act. And like most of these, there's several components again. And the first is it authorizes casino gaming establishments in 3 counties in Arkansas, Miller, Boone, and Washington County, with private businesses being identified who would be those entities. Second, it requires the General Assembly to enact laws to regulate the industry and appropriate monies to an Arkansas Gaming Commission, which would be established. And so that's the third component. It would establish the Arkansas Gaming Commission, which would regulate the casinos as authorized by the amendment. And the fourth thing it does, though, too, is establishes tax policy, because what it does, it allows that the state to tax the casino net proceeds from gaming activities 18%. Counties would get 0.5%, and cities would get 1.5%. Now, in this issue too, I mean, there's basically underlying issues that we're going to be voting on here, which maybe don't come out directly. And one is currently local communities have control over whether they want gaming or whether they want alcohol served. This would not allow them to make that decision. If it's passed statewide, the local communities would not have any control over gaming and alcohol. It would give these companies private monopolies in these 3 counties and written into the state constitution. And third, it would provide tax policy and take that authority away from local governments and the state of deciding how much taxes they would be charged for the gaming proceeds.
We have not one, but two proposals involving marijuana, cannabis, however you want to style it. Dr. McCullough, why don't you take the first one, which would be issue 6?
Right. So issue 6 is the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Amendment of 2016. And both of them basically make the regulated use of medical marijuana legal according to state law, but both also recognize that it's still illegal under federal law. So while there are protections for the patients, caregivers, growers, dispensaries, doctors from arrest, prosecution, penalty, or discrimination under state law, federal laws all still apply. So it establishes a system for growing, acquiring, distributing, and really consuming the medical marijuana for medical purposes. And it kind of splits the authority through multiple entities. So the Department of Health would be responsible for establishing rules related to medical access to marijuana. The Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission would establish rules related to growing and selling it for medical purposes. And then it would also establish a new entity, the Medical Marijuana Commission, which would administer and regulate licensing and cultivation and dispensary types of things. So medical conditions that are allowed are specified within this initiative. It identifies 17 specific medical conditions, but it also gives the Department of Health the authority to add additional conditions if it decides to do so, but it would have to be after public notice and public hearing. Doctors, in all cases, to obtain the medical marijuana, you would have to have written permission from your doctor saying that you have one of these qualifying conditions, and then you would be issued a registry identification card from the Department of Health. Any patients under the age of 18 would have to have their parental or legal guardian consent to get one of those, and those licenses would expire in 1 year or less if the doctor says, you only need it for 6 months. Other things related to this, it would limit the possession. You could only obtain 2.5 ounces every 2 weeks. And it bans the use and possession of that in a variety of places, including surrounding schools, in public places, daycares, colleges, community or recreation centers, public transportation, a variety of other things. And also it would make it illegal to operate any motor vehicle, whether it's a car, a boat, whatever, while you're under the influence. It has some regulations in terms of the number of plants a dispensary can have. A dispensary can have up to 50 mature plants plus seedlings. And it does say that medical marijuana would have to be grown in locked, enclosed facilities. So no one could go out and grow it, out in the woods somewhere.
Backyard
it has to be,
like
exactly. And actually, no one other than someone that's licensed to grow it could grow it.
Yeah.
It says that there has to be at least 20 dispensaries across the state, but no more than 40. Those can't be located within 1,500 feet of a school, church, or daycare. And it has a variety of other things related to that. One of the things that this amendment allows would cities and towns could pass laws to keep it from being within their limits if it was approved by voters. And so again, lots of details in each of these I know we don't have time to get into today, but our voter guide can outline very specifically what it does and does not allow, and it also compares and contrasts what's in this proposed amendment, which is again issue 6, the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Amendment. It compares that to what is included in the act that Wayne's going to talk about.
Yeah, Wayne's got it, and you've got about 2 minutes, so you're really going to need that voter guide. I want to try to give it as much time as I can.
Stacy talked a lot about the medical marijuana issues kind of thing. So this one also regulates the use of medical marijuana. And it establishes a system for growing, dispensing, kind of thing, and distributing marijuana. It's a very detailed kind of program they've laid out. They will provide that the Department of Health will be responsible for developing the regulations, the rules and regulations governing the aspects identified as far as production, distribution, and that. One issue that this one's different than the other one is if I'm a registered a medical marijuana user, then, and I'm more than 20 miles away from a dispensing care center, then I can grow medical marijuana if I get a license from the Department of Health issue. There's also provision there that you can't use medical marijuana in public places, and the local communities have the right to say where they can be located and where they can't be located.
Yeah. Let's hit the voter guide one more time, because we're down to just seconds. And how can an individual access that voter? Get a copy or go online and get it?
All right, so you can go online to the Cooperative Extension Service website, which is www.uaex.edu/ballot, or you can contact your county Cooperative Extension Service office. We have an office in all 75 counties in the state.
And with that, we're simply out of time. Dr. McCullough, Wayne, thanks again so much for your research and for making yourselves available to this audience.
Thank you.
Got a feeling we'll see you in a couple of years. Thank you for watching. See you next time.